There we go. Well, it's good to see everyone out this afternoon. It's good to see the rain, isn't it? Been wanting that for quite some time. I was reading through a psalm the other day, and there was a verse in it that caused me to pause for a moment. Psalm 46. And it's a song about God being the refuge for his people, and how he is the one that will ultimately conquer all nations. And it starts out beautifully with God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. And they go on to extol God and his power, how he is the one that's in the midst of the people and he's the one that's going to provide help. And then if you go down to verse 10 states, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth." When I was reading that in my mind, I was thinking that "be still" needed to have an exclamation point at the end, because it really seems like a command, right? Be still. Now, when we tell our kids that, that's a direct command. You sit down, you be quiet, and you listen. But sometimes we read over that and we just move on. And it just got me to thinking about the be still part. And of course, my mind goes off in many tangents. I don't know about you, but I think about all sorts of different things. And one of the things I was thinking about was sound and noise in our everyday life. Have you ever stopped to consider that? Have you thought about what that does to you on a daily basis? Do you feel like you're just bombarded with sound everywhere, no matter where you go? I see some heads. Yeah, me, all the time, right? I mean, the sources are traffic outside. Your neighborhood may be busy. You go into stores, there's music playing, and our apps. There's constant bings and chimes and all sorts of sounds, things to get our attention, and it's all the time. Think about the entertainment. I can remember going to the movies as a kid. The ad where it says, silence your phone. If you remember that, and then what happens afterwards? You get blasted by the sound from the movie. But we're being bombarded, and it takes a toll. I don't know about you, but it's getting harder and harder to avoid that, not feeling the sense of being overwhelmed by sounds and noise. And it got me to thinking about how it affects me on an everyday level, and not just on the physical side, but what about spiritually? Have you ever really considered that? Is it a distraction for you? Is it a hindrance? Have you been affected by it? And I mean, and how does sound affect us? How does all that noise, how does that affect us in our everyday, in our walk with God? Well, I was doing some research, and I came across a list of things that talks about what sound really does to us when we're being subjected to it day in and day out. And one of the things is it keeps you in this constant fight or flight state. If you know what fight or flight is, you got systems in your body that automatically kick in when you feel like you're in danger, or you're being threatened, or when you're sick, you're fighting. And to be in that state constantly wears on you all the time, doesn't it? It disrupts your sleep. You feel an increased risk of depression and anxiety. Cognitively, you are just tired from having to process that all the time. My brain gets tired listening to sound constantly. Your stress level increases. You feel emotional exhaustion. You're less likely to be able to resist stress that you encounter. Your brain gets overstimulated. That's easy for me. I've got the XY problem, where it's hard for me to process more than one thing at one time. Then when you get sound in there, I'm like, It's hard for me to be in groups, my wife can tell you. I try to have like an exit point where I can kind of step out so I can kind of reset and decompress. I get overwhelmed, and my brain can't handle it because there's just so much going on they're trying to process. And it affects, your ability to solve problems, and just sometimes it just makes every day that much more harder. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's hard to function in a day when you've got so much stimulus coming at you. And then for some, not being able to cope with all of that leads them to some risky behavior. Everyone has a coping mechanism, something that they go to when they're stressed or when they feel like they can't take things. There's always something that we gravitate towards. Some things can be beneficial, getting together. This can be a perfect opportunity. For those watching, it's the same thing. Isn't it greater to be here than to not? We can use each other in helping to cope with life. But others go to other things, alcohol, drug abuse, those sorts of outlets too. People don't have the discipline, and then they go to those, and then they get even more trouble. So, and there's other things that that people gravitate towards. I know that seemed kind of a tangent from that psalm. You're like, where is he going with this? But it just got my mind thinking about it. And I was thinking, well, let's talk about that. For some reason, I really felt compelled to talk about, something practical that we all face, and this may not be something that we ever think about. We're just so used to going through life, and we just, I'll deal with it. You're in the car, and you crank up the music, and you're just driving along. But it's hard when you're in places where you have no control over your environment. And it's hard to get through that sometimes. So, how are we spiritually? It weighs on us too, doesn't it? Not only is it on the physical side, but when we're distracted, when we're beat down, when we're feeling overloaded and tired, it's hard to maintain a good relationship with God. And you can probably think of things that go to the wayside when you're trying to deal with the stresses of life, especially when you're stimulated so much. What are some of the first things that you think about? Prayer life. You're not communicating with God as much as you used to. You're not praying when you get up. You're not praying when you go to bed. You're not praying, making time during your day. Maybe even feeling fatigued from wanting even to meet with people. That's a temptation for some, coping, because they feel like they just need to get away from it. And there are other things I'm sure you can think about that tend to damage your relationship. But how are we to combat that? What are some things that we can do to minimize those effects and for us to be successful in our walk, in our everyday life with God? Obviously, we need to eliminate those variabilities, those things, any of the unnecessary noises and sounds. Some of those things are within our control, right? I need to put this down more often than I do. I need to silence my electronical. Father, I'll tell you every single time. But I tend to kind of cope and bring that back in, don't I? Getting into environments where you're not overstimulated. Going in off times to places where there's not as much noise. It's just the small things that can make a big difference. And then when you see the small things build up, you feel better. I feel a little bit lighter, so to speak. I'm able to focus a little bit better. I'm actually thinking about taking time to spend with my God in prayer. I'm able to spend a little bit more time focusing on studying and interacting with my family and my children with the Word of God, and wanting to be more with family in assembly. And one of the things, with eliminating that, there's a variety of options and methods that you guys can employ. I'm just bringing it to your attention this afternoon. It's just something to think about. We're so busy, we're going 90 miles an hour in the fast lane, and we just think, well, I've just got to deal with it. Just think about the things that you can control that will make your well-being, better, to make you a healthier and happier person when there are things that you can control to eliminate that. One of the things, like I mentioned, is to improve your prayer life. Getting rid of the noise and the sounds. You can do that. And who's the best example of that? Jesus. How does Jesus deal with the noise of the crowds seeking him day in and day out? What does he do? If you go to Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5 and verse 16. Luke is great about the details. Luke chapter 5 and verse 16. It's a small verse, but I think it says a lot. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. And I'm sure we've read that many times. We know that Jesus often went by himself to pray to the Father. But he's doing so purposely to get away from the noise, to get away from all of that would be able to distract him, making it a purpose to remove himself, not just 15, 20 yards away, but going away to where he can focus on talking with his Father. And I hope that we have that draw of wanting to make that a point in our everyday life, to draw ourselves away from the dings and all the sounds and everything. Sometimes it's hard, but sometimes you just have to make the best. I'm in the car a lot, and I'm constantly hearing the road noise, trucks going by. I'm tempted to put on some music and just not even think about it, listen to a podcast. But maybe I should utilize that time to eliminate all of that and meditate on God. Maybe put on the reading of the Word for a little bit, but let me turn that off and let me chew on it too. It's the small things. And there's other passages too. Mark chapter 1:35. Often Jesus going out into the wilderness, separating himself away from everybody. Even in later on in chapter 6 of Mark, and when he's feeding the 5,000, he sends his disciples away because there's time where you need separation, and he's showing that's necessary to go off and to pray. And then later in the book of Mark in 14, when Jesus is in the garden, he's got some disciples with him, and even still he is, even at a time right before the beating and the mocking and him being crucified, he is still wanting to take time. He needs that time, the quiet and the solitude, to focus. And so I think Jesus is a great example of taking steps. And sometimes for some folks, it might be that seems pretty drastic. But if your relationship to God is that important, we need to take drastic steps. You need to do what it takes to have that clear focus. And the same thing goes with studying. I don't know about you, but when I got tasks going and when I'm working, I like to have some fun tunes in the background. This kind of keeps me going and keeps me motivated. But I have to have a difficult time when I'm trying to study if I've got noise going on, if I've got music. I'm more focused on that than I am trying to comprehend. And so, for some they can multitask that way, but for me I can't. So, and I just need to keep my focus on what's important, because I often get distracted. I get squirrel syndrome sometimes, and that's not good. What about our relationship with others too? There can be a lot of noise from people. Lots of conversations you might be a part of, or you hear. It's easy to get caught up in all of the arguments and the back and forth. Facebook is a big trap for that. Other social media, you might be thinking, well, I'm going to make a good point about this. Okay, got to be careful with that, because then he gets kind of drawn into the back and forth, and all of a sudden you're in this heated argument, and it's not stop. And you're like, how did I even get to this point? So how can we use silence as a tool in our conversation with one another? Well, when I was a kid, my dad really emphasized the use of words. Some people used to call him a wordsmith, because he would tailor his words to be really, really effective. And he says, while the words are very important, in order for those words to be important, it's the silence that precedes it and the silence that follows. Has anybody run into somebody who just is nonstop? They talk and they talk and they talk and they talk. It's hard to know what's important and what's not. And it's hard for me to stay in a conversation with somebody like that when it's just constant, because you don't know if it's something important that you need to remember, or if it's just details about things that have no bearing. They don't matter at all. So it's important for the words that we say. And people often mistake me as somebody who doesn't react immediately. I like to think about my response. And sometimes I've gotten criticized for that, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being slow to respond, because I want to think about it. I want to have the right reaction to whatever that situation is. And sometimes it's better to say nothing rather than to try to formulate a response. Because sometimes we have a knee-jerk reaction, and there's words right there at the tip of our tongue, and we want to unleash them so bad. But you know what? God says don't. He says, we need to be kind with the words that we say. Just like we tell our kids, it's better to say something nice than to not say anything at all. That goes for me too as an adult. As a kid, I had a really bad habit of being snarky, using sarcasm, also as a mode of defense, trying to put people down and not even realize it. I'm not proud of that, but that's what I did as a kid, and it crept into adulthood. And there are some times where I've just got to bite my tongue. I could be quippy, but it's not going to do any good to anybody. So it's better for just to respond with silence, with nothing. Sometimes you just let people need to be stupid. Just let them. Because sometimes it's just not even worth the response. So sometimes silence can be a useful tool in conversation. What about complaining? You go to Philippians chapter 2. Very familiar passage in Philippians 2, verse 14. Very small but yet powerful when it comes to how what our attitude needs to be when we're doing everyday things, assembling together. Do all things without complaining and disputing. How many times have you been in Walmart or somewhere in public where there's a bunch of people and you just hear people complain constantly, all the time? I get that a lot at work. And it's tiring. But yet, I'm also guilty of it too, of complaining. And my response needs to be that I don't complain. The Lord has blessed us richly. The Lord has granted us so many good things. And oftentimes our complaints are really meaningless. Sometimes we just need to vent, and there's a place for that. But complaining really just means that you're rebelling. This isn't good enough. Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to somebody else? We have to be careful. We got to be careful with those words that we say, that while we think that they're doing us some good by letting off some steam, it's really a disrespect and disservice to God when we complain. Because we're telling him, well, what you've done for me is just not good enough. We have to be really, really careful with those words, and that's got to hold back. Bite your tongue. And going on to the arguments and all that, not even responding to the foolish arguments. Don't even get into all of that. I've been guilty of commenting and stepping in when I shouldn't have, and it really didn't do anything. It was a detriment to the conversation, and when I think I was really helpful, I wasn't. So if you go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul is obviously offering encouragement and instruction to Timothy, the young preacher, all sorts of advice given to him. And in chapter 2, going down to verse 23, Paul is instructing Timothy to also avoid these arguments, these foolish conversations that don't amount to anything. He says in verse 23, avoid foolish and ignorant disputes, knowing that they generate strife. And a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, and patient. That needs to be us. Sometimes by not responding, you're taking a stand as well. But in today's society, there's a lot of emphasis on, well, you need to tell them off. You need to say something about that. Well, you know what? Sometimes I don't. I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't need to get into all of that. And some folks are just talking just to stir something up. And sometimes it's best for you just to not say anything at all. Or sometimes it's easy to have a calm and gentle answer. Sometimes something a soft answer turns away wrath, right? Proverbs 15, verse 1. Sometimes you need something small to respond and then to leave it at that. Let the response sink in and let it address the situation. And then there's some times where no response can also be the best one, in the fact that sometimes just being present in the situation is enough. Like, well, what does that mean? You remember Job? Job was well blessed by God. He had everything. He had a wonderful family. He had possessions, money, all of that. And then we were privy behind the scenes to see a conversation between God and Satan. He allowed Satan to take all that away from him. Just don't kill him. Satan touched him as well, afflicted him with boils. Word got out to his friends. He had 3 friends. And in Job chapter 2, these 3 friends come to Job, and they see him in his situation. And, their response, I'll just read it. It's just easier to say. Job chapter 2, verse 11. And now when Job's 3 friends heard of all of this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they made an appointment together to come and mourn with him, and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar, and they did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Sometimes when you see the tragedy of others, and so these difficult trials that they're going through, we're so tempted to want to have just that perfect response, something that's just going to lift them up. I've often think that I had the perfect response in some of those situations. But I see the benefit of just being present, being there. Sometimes it's just a hug for someone. No words needed. Sometimes we just need to be present with one another. There will be time for talk. There will be time to converse and to comfort. But sometimes there's just a need to be there for somebody. To sit with them for a little while. And while that may feel awkward for some, it can be a tremendous benefit for the other person. Because this day and age, everything is about reacting and doing this and that and the other. You know, the concept of silence for the world is foreign. You've got to be able to make your voice heard, and you got to tell them what's going on and what you're thinking and all that. God commands us to be a peaceable and quiet people. And sometimes we just need to sit with our brothers and sisters. Just as the three friends did with Job. Now we know they had plenty to say afterwards. So we can learn from that too, right? What not to do, what not to say. Although in their mind, they were still trying to help their friends. So in a way, I'll kind of give them a pass on that. But, you know, what great friendship you have when somebody can just do that for you for a whole week. And sometimes eliminating all the noise, the sounds and everything really can help you see what's going on around you. When you're inundated, when you're overstimulated, I can't speak, words are hard today. I know. Hey, it's a long weekend, so I've got tomorrow to recoup, right? But you know what I mean. It's hard to see what's going on around you when you're constantly focused, right? When you just can't deal with everything else, so many times we retreat within ourselves. And oftentimes something to help with that, looking to the needs of others. You know, what's really going on with my brothers and sisters? How can I help somebody else? And that also can help with our spiritual well-being. When I've been focusing on myself, trying to get myself to calm down and not be anxious and worry and all the negative effects when we're constantly bombarded with all of this, eliminating all that. Oh, I didn't realize my brother needs my help with this. Or sister is dealing with something very difficult. Let me get in touch with them. There are many things that we can see outside of our purview once we get ourselves removed from that and eliminate the world. We can start focusing on what's really important in our family. And one of the things about serving others, just makes you feel good. I like doing things for others. I've always have. I enjoy being able to help somebody and seeing the benefit that it is for them. I'm one of those weirdos. I just like doing good things for others. You know, I don't expect anything in return. I just like to do it. I've enjoyed that. And Paul does, he's encouraging the brethren in Philippi in chapter 2. He encourages them to look to the needs of others and to get yourself out of the way, eliminate the distractions. Philippians chapter 2, he encourages them to focus on others. Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 3. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each one of you look not to only his own interests, but also the interest of others. And when you start eliminating the distractions and looking to the interests of others, you see there's a lot to be done. When you eliminate the noise, it's easier to hear. It's easier to observe. And so then you're privy to the needs of others. You're privy to other situations that you may be able to help in. And so, we've got to make time to eliminate that so that we have the time to help others. And also to take time in your day to enjoy God's creation. I don't often do enough of that. Doing it from the driver's seat of my car is not the most ideal way to enjoy that. Although I do get to see some nice scenery from time to time. But we got to make it a point to get out in God's creation. When you're out working in the yard, taking a hike, I know you guys like hiking. When you are disconnected in that sense, we do too. It's a wonderful feeling. There are things that you can observe when you're not distracted with all of the sounds, with traffic and people and all of that. There are things that you probably have never noticed that you will when you're in those situations. The calmness that you feel when you're just out in the woods or wherever. If you're a beach goer, then get away from the people first before you can really enjoy it. But when you're out in God's creation, there's a sense of peace and calming, and it's hard to describe. But make it a point to do that. It helps reset your mind, helps reset the senses. Many times in the Psalms, Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God and his handiwork. When you're out there, do you hear that? Do you hear God's creation praising him? Take the opportunities to do that if you haven't in a while. Carve out some time in your day. Find somewhere. There's a lot of good places where there aren't a lot of people or any people at all, and you can go out there and enjoy it. But it is very beneficial. I believe it's one of the reasons he also created for us to enjoy. But we get so busy in day to day that we neglect to take some time to enjoy what he has made for us. So in conclusion, I apologize for this rabbit trip that we've been on today, but I just hope that it's something of benefit to you in your walk with God, that to eliminate the distractions, eliminate the noise. Noise can be good, but it can also be bad. We also have to be careful that we don't contribute to the noise. It's easy to get caught up in those petty arguments, those conversations that we feel like we're being of help, and it just keeps on going, and it just spirals out of control. We're called to be a people that are supposed to be sober and vigilant. It's hard to be sober and vigilant when you're distracted, when you feel beat down by the world. The world is constantly wanting your attention, and Satan will do what it takes to distract you and to keep you that way. And I think a lot of our entertainment, he is using that against us. You get out into places where it's overpopulated, and not that you can control that, but certain areas have grown up so much. There is so much noise and people, and where I used to grow up, it didn't used to be that way, but the last couple of times we are sort of in that area, it is so overwhelming. First opportunity to get out of there. It's kind of like where Emily and Dion live in Cumming. It's just there's so many people and so confined of an area, too much going on. But if we're going to be successful in our walk with God, we got to do what it takes to eliminate the distractions. And sounds are one of them. It's wonderful to have the senses. to be able to hear beautiful music and the chirping of the birds and all of that. But sometimes you just I wish you could just turn it all off because it's too much. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention, just something I felt kind of compelled to talk about, something that I struggle with from time to time with sounds. And I need to do better about eliminating what I can control. Because I will get often distracted by things that I don't need to get distracted by. Something that gets my attention, and then I trail off, and before I know it, I've wasted a whole bunch of time doing something because I heard something, and then I've just wasted time and it didn't amount to anything. We got to be careful that the enemy continues to roam around like a lion, like in 1 Peter. He's going to use those things against us. So this afternoon, what is it for you? Are you overwhelmed? Are you struggling with that? If you're not, fantastic. Good for you. But I say all of us are probably privy to some sort of distress and overburdened with the noises from the world. And we've got to do as much as we can to combat that. As Mike talked about this morning, we can resist the devil, right? We resist the devil and he will flee. So if we don't let him use those devices against us, we can be successful in our walk with God. So anyways, I just wanted to bring it up this afternoon. I hope it's been helpful. At least something for you to chew on. Maybe take that moment in your through this week. Maybe just kind of evaluate. Is that a source of stress for me? Is that something I need to work on? Eliminating those things? If so, great. There's always things that we can work on to be better and with our relationship with God, whether it's in prayer life and study or being with people, helping, whatever it is. We always can make improvements on being better. Try to do better today than you did yesterday. So I thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for allowing me to be up here and talk. I know I haven't said anything about the plan of salvation, but Jesus died for all of us. He made the sacrifice so that we can be freed from the bondage of sin. And everyone has that opportunity to take advantage of that. If you haven't done so this evening, this is a great time. No time like the present. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. We're not even guaranteed the rest of this day. But don't let that be a burden to you if you haven't called on Christ. But for those of us who are in the body of Christ, life isn't easy. There are times when we're like Peter and we get out of the boat and we're walking and we're confident. And there's other times where we're drowning, asking, Lord, save me. And sometimes those days we just don't want to get out of the boat, period. And we're struggling. So if you're having issues and, it's great to be amongst family because we can talk about that. We can share the burdens. We can help one another. We can ask for prayers on each other's behalf and lift them up to our great God who is always there. Put those burdens and issues at his feet. That's what he's there for. So if there's anything that you guys like to take advantage of, calling on the name of Christ or asking